a naturally arising experience of awakening, that is really key. Awakening in your own time, still in connection with your own dreams, is a really different feeling than the alarm clock goes off. Because when that happens, that we're disconnected from the dream life. Not just we're reconnecting to being rested enough to work with our bodies and minds, but actually with proper rest, we start to connect to dreams and to a whole other invisible world of things that are real, but that you lose touch with. If you're woken every morning before you're fully able to retrieve your dream wisdom and your connection to your own psyche, that's what's disconnected as well. We're disconnected from our own spirit messages and soul, as well as disconnected from life, like feeling pretty much like death when you're tired.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back, and welcome to any of you that are new to this podcast and community. There are two ways that you can get involved in a deeper way. One, by becoming a monthly patron and supporting us in the making of the show with a donation, and then being part of our patron chat group and video calls. And secondly, by joining our membership platform, Presence Collective, where we dive deeper into the themes of the podcast. You can find out more about both of these on our website, www.thefutureisbeautiful.co, by clicking on community and courses, respectively. Also, if you're the sort of person that gives gifts for the holidays, please consider our very special book, The Future is Beautiful. It has this quote on the front cover by Jonathan Robinson, which I love. Imagination is the most precious currency we have. This anthology is a priceless, awe-inspiring companion in a time for new dreams. This project was started in the run-up to the UK election in 2010. And for those of you in the UK, we have an important election today. It's also the last full moon of the decade tonight. I was reading that there is a group of people who could swing this election. And it's not the over 65s or the UKIP voters who've turned Tory, but in fact, women under 30. I know we have a lot of you listening, so please do go and vote. We need your voice. One big election issue that's on my mind, and I know the hearts of so many of you, is saving the NHS. From all reports, having spoken to people who work in the NHS and reading various articles, the Tories have been destroying the NHS, and if they get re-elected and Brexit happens, it's extremely likely that it will be sold off. This means that those who can't afford health insurance will be hit the hardest. Did you realise that the cost of calling out an ambulance is £2,000, or the cost of having a baby is £30,000? Can you imagine what that means for women that don't have health insurance? In the UK, we already have more Black women dying from childbirth than white women. Many of us take for granted having an NHS and being able to get things checked or talk through issues with doctors and nurses, or being able to get help in an emergency. I know many in the States who don't have health insurance and can't afford to get help or advice when they need it. As well as those on lower incomes, this affects creatives, freelancers, anyone without the safety net of a full-time job with benefits. If you haven't voted yet, please look at the tactical voting websites and see how you can help save the NHS. My guest today is Uma Dinsmore-Tuli, PhD, who is a writer, visionary, radical yogini, Total Yoga Nidra advocate, and eco-feminist activist. I just completed Uma's Well Woman Yoga Therapy training, which was a beautiful and intense exploration into the cycles of womanhood with supporting practices and the kind of information that I wish every woman learned as a teenager, and every man for that matter, that they and we understood what being a woman really means and the power of the womb. That would change the world. Uma met yoga in 1969 at the age of 4 and fell in love. She's been practicing ever since and teaching yoga since 1994. A yoga therapist with special expertise in yoga therapy for women's health, Uma is the mother of 3 and has written 4 books on yoga for women, including the massive Yoni Shakti, now in its 2nd printing. Uma works internationally, sharing yoga retreats, trainings, and empowerments that support the natural arising of prana shakti, the power of life. Since 2001, she has trained a total of over 1,000 specialist teachers in Total Yoga Nidra, women's yoga, womb yoga for all stages of women's lives, and therapeutic yoga for pregnancy, birth, and postnatal recovery. In 2005, Uma created the annual Santosha Living Yoga and Bhakti Camp, which now has sister camps in Ireland and Cornwall. She is the co-founder of the Yoga Nidra network and has developed Total Yoga Nidra, Wild Nidra, and Nidra Shakti, radical, creative, and intuitive approaches to sharing Yoga Nidra. Uma's passion as a writer and as a teacher is to transmit the clarity of awareness, creativity, and profound vitality nourished by the Yoga Tantra. Her practice and teaching respects the cyclical powers of the living earth and honors human life cycles as spiritual initiations, including conscious menstruation, menopause, birth, and postnatal recovery. We recorded this interview late one night at 1440 Multiversity in California, which is a stunning center for courses and retreats. Whilst we were there, multiple other courses were running, including one with Thomas Hubel and one with Elaine Aron. We were deep in the art of total rest, and it was a nourishing and healing weekend. I highly recommend the food of 1442 if you ever get a chance to go to something there. Uma offers Yoga Nidra as a practice that connects us to this part of ourselves, our creativity, so we have dreams, vision, or just live life with clear minds and open hearts. In a world where exhaustion is still seen as a status symbol, rest is a form of activism. With the winter solstice upon us for those in the Northern Hemisphere, we're entering our time of darkness and rest, and with our cultural bias towards finishing all work before Christmas and partying, within that, make time to go inwards and get some rest. We've included a Total Yoga Nidra at the end so you can experience it. The one Uma has chosen was recorded live in Copenhagen at Yoga Mudra Studio on an immersion weekend, and it includes the sound of Nepali singing bowls and talking bowls and some chimes. Its intention is purely and simply to rest and be welcome on this earth, wherever you are. I hope that you enjoy this episode as we explore the question, how can we reconnect with natural cycles of rest and healing? Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. Uma, it is an absolute delight to welcome you to The Future is Beautiful. Thank you for coming and being part of this show.
Thank you for inviting me.
I have just spent this weekend with you, and we have been in the art of total rest. And I would love for you to share why rest is such a radical act and why it is what you have devoted so much of your time to enabling.
What I see and what I feel when humans get to rest, even just sufficient rest, when humans rest deeply, there's a capacity to be fully present and fully in rhythm with life as it manifests. Like just having healthy sleep cycles is one of the ways in which humans feel ourselves to be part of all that's alive, as we feel part of those rhythms. And when we disconnect from that, start lording it over sleep and all those other cycles that go on, I see that everything starts to fall apart. And the primary thing that gets lost is connection. Like we feel disconnected from the rhythms of life. So when we restore those rhythms by letting people, now I feel we have to relearn how to rest, or even just give people permission to rest, then that's really powerful. We make wiser choices about our lives because we feel ourselves to be properly in connection with all that's alive. And it's also a radical thing just to stay, I'm going to stop, the machinery of like endless productivity and endless growth and endless pressure and endless pushing. All it takes is for somebody to say, actually, I'm going to take a nap now. I'm going to stop. And the whole thing comes tumbling down. It's an incredibly radical act. It might be the only radical act that's left that people can do. But I do see, like, we've just spent, from Friday night to Sunday afternoon helping people rest and rest deeply and rest repeatedly. And the people looked different by the time they left, totally different, rediscovered things they'd forgotten about, which is like, oh yes, I can actually rest in the day. Somebody said that to me. I'd forgotten I could rest. So it helps at every level, like at the physical level, it supports people's immune systems and health and well-being and manages pain and all those kind of physical embodied sufferings that we have all feel better if you have a nap. It's like, that's really simple. So from that perspective, but at the level of their vital energies, evidently that's boosted, and your creativity, your connection, your capacity to relate, not just to other humans, but to like everything else that's alive. We can't do any of that if we're tired.
And I love that what we're talking about isn't just like getting the 8 hours that we've been conditioned to thinking that's rest or like that's enough rest.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about is getting reconnected to the bigger cycles as humans that for a long time we've been taken out of by the way that we live our lives.
Absolutely. That sense that there's also a sense that if you really track how humans naturally sleep, it might not be just 8 hours straight. That there actually, there are histories of sleep that show us that pre-industrial sleep patterns were actually quite different from that. And if we're left to our own devices outside of some clock time running shift system that's keeping the machinery of capitalist economy running, if we're out of that, then we will actually sleep in different ways. We might be more likely to rest in the afternoons or sleep earlier and take a pause in the middle of the night when it's perfectly normal to wake up and be inspired by your dreams and then rest and go back. There's all kinds of ways we can engage with sleep. And if we get a naturally arising experience of awakening, that is really key, because that process of awakening in your own time, still in connection with your own dreams, is a really different feeling than the alarm clock goes off and jump up and jump to the train and that. Because when that happens, we're disconnected from the dream life. So when I talk about reconnection, it's like not just we're reconnecting to being rested enough to work with our bodies and minds, but actually with proper rest, we start to connect to dreams and to a whole other invisible world of things that are real, but that you lose touch with if you're woken every morning before you're fully able to retrieve your dream wisdom and your connection to your own psyche. That's what's disconnected as well. We're disconnected from our own spirit messages and soul, as well as disconnected from life by feeling pretty much like death when you're tired.
And then the result of that is that those dreams, that where we would have our own dreams or our own connection to our psyche, to our wisdom, to our spirit world, that gets taken over by whatever's being sold to us.
Yeah, I think if we are disconnected from our dreams, because we are actually hungry. There's such a hunger for dream and story and meaning making and processing. And actually, one way to understand what's happening when we're sleeping sufficiently and dreaming sufficiently, and it might not mean that you remember your dreams, but it's an emotional processing and digestive system. There's a really beautiful teaching from Ruben Nyman, who writes a lot about sleep, and he talks about it as being, if we're not dreaming, if we're deprived, not just sleep deprivation, but dream deprivation, that's happening then we're fundamentally emotionally constipated. We can't actually, it's our system that we have for digesting and processing our emotional responses and all the stimulus and the input that comes during the day. We process that in the nighttime. And if we're not getting sufficient and quality of rest, we don't get to do that. Stuff gets stuck. You get stuck in trauma. You get stuck with the emotional process that's unresolved and not even addressed. And we have a system for dealing with it.
Is that the same if people can't remember their dreams?
Well,
or like a lot of people will say that, oh, I never remember my dreams. Like I have no idea what I dream of. Like if it's not just I remembered it and then I forgot it, but a sense of never knowing what you dream about.
As far as I understand it, and I see this sometimes in Yoga Nidra, which is the practice I'm teaching, where people can connect with these different states of consciousness, is that we do dream. You dream because you're asleep, you're going through these processes, and so you are having this period of the sleep time that is dream time. But the capacity to remember dreams is something that is cultivated. It's a cultivated thing, and actually there's incentives and connections with sharing your dreams with other people and valuing them and saying, oh, did you dream last night? And even the fact that somebody's asking about that helps us to pay a little attention, or to have a notebook by the bed and write it down, or just it's as if we're constantly getting these messages from our psyche. It's like we don't actually pay any attention to them, because we can't quite hear them, and they're sometimes quite quiet. And what I observe happened this weekend even, actually. It's a different way to relate to the experience of being asleep and dreaming. And it's, if you relate to those different states of consciousness with interest and respect, then they start to talk back to you. It's almost like kind of awakening your awareness to the fact that it's important to know what's going on when you're dreaming and sleeping. So the Yoga Nidra practice helps us to hover in that special place where we might cultivate more consciousness of sleep and dreams. And there's so many people doing beautiful work about this. People in the lucid dream world, and people kind of working with awareness of sleep and dream. And Nidra is part of this. Yoga Nidra is like an amazing tool for being with that. It's almost as if we have a deep well of wisdom within us, and we're not even aware that it's there, which is like, oh, I can't remember any of my dreams. I never dream. Actually, we do. We just need to cultivate the capacity to remember and to pay attention.
I like the example that you were giving from some point in history where people would maybe go to sleep early and then have like the beauty sleep part, like, and then wake up and be up for a while, do whatever creative things they might need to do, or go and check on the farm animals or whatever it is, and then go back to sleep and then have that kind of deeper processing time. It's one of the things that I've really missed. Is I used to be a real night owl. And then in my mid-20s, I trained myself to become a morning person. And it was quite a difficult process to go through. But there was like a loss of creativity in the process, because I didn't have the ability to get up and be really creative in the mornings. But then I also was losing that like late night time. And after some practice, like it shifted, and now I can get up and create. But I really like the idea of using that time in the morning, because sometimes I do that waking up, the kind of yogi waking up at 4 a.m. and thinking, oh, I can get up and create now and then go back to sleep afterwards. That feels really nice to still have that time that I think night owls love, that sense of, well, soda, morning larks, like enjoy that time where they know that everyone isn't up being productive. It feels really special.
There's a precious quality of like freshness, you know, like a beach when no one's walked on it, or snow that hasn't got any footprints in it. And that's the quality of mind at the point when you just wake up. And there's this consciousness of being aware of the dream state and the awakening, and this thin little veil between the two of them. And that's why I think they're creative times, whether that happens in the middle of the night or for me, as a lot, that happens in the morning, to awaken in that place. But it needs to be preciously guarded, because if what happens is an alarm goes off and you're up and you're out and your time belongs to some boss who owns your time, then it's stolen from us. Or we give it away because we don't value it. But it's hugely precious, because I think what I've learned from practicing Yoga Nidra and understanding these places is that there are liminal places. They're just at the limits of one thing before you get into the other thing. And in those places is where all the juices, all the songs and the poems and the visions and the connections and the heartfelt prayers, and they all come from that place. And so one of those ways to find that place is these little junctions. I guard it really preciously, that time when you wake up in the morning, and it's immensely creative, because you're like actually traversing the place where the kind of the waves of the nighttime kind of come into the shore of your waking. And it's in that place where those two things meet that I find it an immensely, as a writer, that's why I find it's really precious and creative. And I think it's a widespread experience that time is really richly giving. But you have to give it respect. It's valuable. It's really important.
And so do you give yourself quite a lot of time in the morning so that you have space to create and be in your practices?
It all depends. Yes, it's my intention to do that. Sometimes it's not possible because there's travel or family or something happens, but more often than not, whenever that's possible. And sometimes that involves maybe waking up a little earlier than is needed, or being really quite vigilant about going to bed early, because I for a long time I say, well, I have a date with dawn. I have a date with Usha, with the dawn. And that's really important to me. So I turn down social engagements and restaurants and parties, and because it seemed that is so precious. So if I can, I make space for that. And it will involve Yoga Nidra, which is like waking up, but then staying in that state. So setting like a 20-minute or half-hour timer to do a practice of Nidra. And sometimes it involves listening to the dreams. And sometimes it involves writing the dreams down. And sometimes it involves writing whatever poems or things have come through and writing them all down. And then sometimes it involves just being that with that state and cultivating like a love for it. Like I love it. It's a respectful place. And then also if I get a chance, I like go outside and like then be reconnected barefoot on the earth and do some yoga practice or what have you. But like you can't, it's not feasible in the way I do that every single day. But like it's such a precious joy, and it feels that's where I'm listening the most, to actually listen to what's there before anything else gets in. I want to pollute it or distract myself from it by listening. So I'm really picky about like, if I do have to use an alarm, what it sounds like and all that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. This is like really precious, and it's a rare privilege to live the kind of life that you can make that time. People are so rushed and harried. I'm aware of it as an enormous privilege and of a really powerfully transformative choice for people to make. And I observe that with students and people doing this work who come to me. They'll have some days of experience like that on a retreat or on a yoga event or something. They go, oh my God, I remembered my dreams for the first time in years, or I slept in a way that I haven't slept in years, and this is so valuable to me. And you see their eyes light up and they're like, this really matters. And then they'll make a choice to kind of try and invite that into their daily lives. And I see that as transformation, like one night's sleep at a time. Yeah. Really matters.
When did you first discover the practice of Yoga Nidra? And how did it feel when you first did it? Did you kind of get the sense, this is something that I want to...
No, I love this. I love this question because like lots of things in yoga, there are people think there are set forms and schools and traditions and lineages and all that. And the first time I actually met Yoga Nidra in its kind of contemporary form, which is this 10-part structure or 12, was in a yoga center in London in, I think it was probably in the 1990s. But when I met it, I recognized the state that it brought about. So Yoga Nidra is actually, it's a technique, but it's not a technique, it's a state of awareness. So we use the technique to get into the state of awareness. And my experience, like in the mid-90s when I encountered this, was like, oh, it was like meeting an old friend. I was like, oh, I know you, love. I know you. I remember this. And what I remembered was the experience that I'd had as a child. I kind of lived in that state as a child. I think many of us do. It's like I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time outside and in the woods and writing poetry and being connected with whatever was going on. And I was often in that kind of trancey state. And I could go in and out of it very easily and had very, very vivid dreams. And I remembered the moment I laid down to do the Yoga Nidra. So I was like a graduate student at the university, and I get shut out. And I was like, oh, so we lay down and we do this. And it started to happen in Hatha yoga classes. I just go into those short relaxation practices and be like, oh, this is the best bit. This is the best bit. And then when I discovered there was this formal practice, I had a cassette tape, that I listened to. And then the teachers in the school I was going to, well, I was like, I recognized it. So I was like, this is really something that's already in me. And I felt it helps us reclaim like a birthright. That state of consciousness is actually all of ours. Everybody that's human can be in that place. And I'd kind of, like a lot of people, got into my early adulthood and, done academic study and working and all that kind of thing, and hadn't remembered how to do that. Even though I was writing for a living or that thing, I got into a very kind of cerebral approach to that kind of thing because I've been trained out of it, trained to distrust intuition and all that stuff. But it was like, when you get a kind of smell and you're like, oh, that smells just like my granny's house, or oh, that reminds me of my old auntie, or it takes you right back. And the Yoga Nidra experience was like that. I was like, oh, I know what this is. Oh yeah, I remember. And I was so grateful that there was this technique that would help me, and I could see everyone else also access this really vital state of being. Yeah. So that was like the mid-90s, I think. And I was like, oh, this is important. So I started to learn how to share the form that I had encountered. So I did a training course that included, you had to practice Yoga Nidra every day. And that was the best bit about it, actually. You had to listen to the cassettes every day and learn how to do it and write a script based on very formal ideas. And I remember very clunky learning how to lead people through this practice and having people show up for classes in the yoga therapy center where I was teaching, going, is this some like weird special class? I was like, no, we do this every week. This is what we do. And learning in a very stumbling way to like replicate this form that I had valued, because I was like, oh, this works. So I learned how to do that. And that was kind of in the mid to late 90s I was doing that.
And so then it just carried on from there.
Yeah.
And it became more of a relationship with the goddess Nidra and you, rather than this form.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that trajectory, it kind of interests me as a sort of liberatory process, because and it's a process that I see replicated in quite a lot of, in not just yoga, but other kind of spiritual frameworks and lineages. So you meet the form and you think, oh, this is it. I was like, yeah, so I'm signed up with these people and these are the ones who've got it, and I'll read the books and learn their one. And I was very wedded to that form, and you get a facility with that form. But actually what the form is protecting is the state of awareness that it helps you get into. And I'm like, okay. So I started to learn. And then what happened was that in the ways that many humans are quite territorial, these yogic were like, well, this is Yoga Nidra is ours. And they trademarked it and said, this is our thing. And then I started hearing that there were people in the United States who had a different way to do this. And I started reading stuff because I was a curious, researching kind of a person. And I remember coming back to these people who taught me this form and saying, yeah, but like this guy in the States is doing it like this. They said, oh, well, that's not really Yoga Nidra. And I went, well, it feels like Yoga Nidra to me. I mean, you shouldn't be listening to that. And I was like, wow, if you're going to ban it, then I'm really interested in it. So I started researching all these different things. And when we had a visit of Richard Miller from the Iris, and he came to the UK, and I was like, I'll go make his tea for him. I was like, I'll go and help. And I was like, oh, this is another form. So then I started to see there were quite a number of different forms. And the more I opened my mind to the diversity of all the different forms that people had made to capture this thing, I said, so now if we get underneath this, it was like a kind of feminist excavation. I was like, so it seems to me that the active ingredient of Yoga Nidra is Nidra Shakti. And she, I experienced it really as her, as a goddess form, is a power of the goddess, like Prana Shakti, or like all the different other kinds of Shakti that they are. And I was like, and she lives in Yoga Nidra. And then the more I felt that, I got more and more comfortable with, I learned all these other different forms, and it's like becoming multilingual or something. I learned how to deliver all the different forms. And then I realized more and more that actually the only reason any of them worked is because they were giving people direct access to what was already in them, which was her, which was this capacity to fall asleep. So it's basically like meditation on falling asleep and becoming conscious of that. And then when that happened, everything changed, because I was like, now we have Total Yoga Nidra. So I made up another term for this. But basically what it meant was, if you welcome all these other different forms in, then sometimes you need one form that's going to work better for this person, and that person's going to respond better to this. And at this time of day, this is going to work. So I started to be it was more like a kind of integration of lots of different forms, and then still using the structures, because I think they are helpful, but realizing that was the real awakening, which is, and it's all power, and it, like the essential nature of the whole thing is total paradox, because there's a sleep that you practice in order to awaken the fact to see the dream that we live, which is a delusion anyway, and to see through time. And you get all these these things that seem like philosophical structures and philosophical ideas become real experiences. Because you're like, yeah, I've seen through time. Why? Well, because I did this Yoga Nidra that I thought was, 5 hours long, and it was only 20 minutes. And when I was there, I felt like I was everywhere on earth. So all these experiences that you read about, and I'd read about them in philosophical books, they just started happening, not just to me, but like to pretty much anybody who would do that practice would go, oh yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, we've seen through time. That's a delusion, or we've experienced what it's like to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time, or all those things that happen. And so it was like growing a relationship with this really powerful force of life, who demands full respect, because like she's going to get everyone in the end. And then I started reading more history and realizing that there was before all the history that the people who'd set up the yoga schools said, there was a history of Nidra Shakti as a goddess form showing up, like in the Ramayana and in the Mahabharata. And I was like, she's really powerful, like all these Sleeping Beauty type stories. Yeah, so I started getting some help to do some research about that, and found these wonderful stories. And I was like, that's because she's super powerful.
Can you tell us one?
Yeah, my favorite one is, it's about in the Ramayana when Ram is banished to the forest, and he's really worried that like something bad is going to happen to Sita. So the understanding I had of it is like, he's the great what if, and Sita's the individual soul, and he's really worried that terrible things are going to happen. But in the story, it's his wife. So he asks his brother, Lakshman, to look after her. He says, you got to just watch her, just look after her, because I've got to go off and fight all the demons. And Lakshman is a really good brother, and he loves Ram. And he says, I will do that. He says, brother, I will not sleep a wink. I will keep my eyes open, and you can trust that Sita will be safe with me. So Ram goes, that's a good deal. And he goes, oh. And then, of course, what happens is that Nidra Shakti shows up in the forest, because she hears that this human man is trying to be in defiance of the natural order of things, which is that everything that's alive and he's asleep. And so she challenges him and says, this isn't okay. I heard that you're not going to sleep, and like, I'm Nidra Shakti, and I'm afraid you have to sleep. And he says, I can't sleep, because I told Ram I'm going to look after Sita, and I have to stay on watch, until he comes back. It could be years, and they have a big, set too. And she's so hugely powerful. He has to be very respectful to her. So he realizes there's no getting out of it. Like, basically, it doesn't matter how much coffee you drink, at some point, you're going to have to go to sleep. So she says, I'm sorry, that's it. You have to sleep. He says, well, how about, he has this bright idea. He said, I left my wife behind in the palace. How about she can go to sleep for me? So who's this? She's called Urmila. And so Lakshman says, well, how about that? And she kind of thinks about it for a bit. And she's like, it's quite unorthodox. This isn't really what happens. But in the end, they come to an agreement. So he gets to stay awake until Ram comes back. And this goes on. He doesn't sleep for 14 years. And in this time, what happens back at the palace? And to me, it was like the Sleeping Beauty story. Urmila falls asleep and nobody knows what's happened to her. And she's in a deep sleep for the whole time until the whole party gets back, and they have all those adventures and Hanuman and Ram, and they all come back. And then the moment that they get back, there's going to be this big coronation and Ram's going to be the king and Lakshman's going to stand at his side. Lakshman has to fall straight back to sleep because Nidra Shakti shows up and she says, now, it's your turn. She's going to wake up. You have to go back to sleep. I love that story. So the moral, the understanding I got is that she is so immensely powerful that even all these powerful gods and kings and everybody has to sleep. And even if you can get your wife to do it for you for 14 years, you still have to catch up. And it was like a sense of like understanding how she'll get you. I see it. She'll age you. Your hair will fall out. You'll get really sick. And it doesn't matter how much Pro Plus and coffee and whatever you take and how important you are. Terrible things will happen to you.
Well, and also the terrible things that happen in the world in general, because we're so sleep deprived, especially a lot of our leaders.
This is what I see when I look at summits and like world big meetings when they're making really important decisions, and those people are underslept confusions.
And there's a big drinking culture as well.
Yeah.
From when I worked in politics, I remember that was one of the perks, that there was always a lot of free or very subsidized alcohol around. There's the pressure and there's the drinking and there's the short sleeps, and it all adds up to not being fully present.
Completely not present. Like, it's not possible to be present when you're that tired. And that's actually, like, for a moment, that it's deeply terrifying, and I can see it. You see it on the faces, and then you see it in the arguments that are happening, and they're not informed or helpful arguments at all. But then what I see is that if you create a space where, imagine if before important votes were made in Westminster or, in Brussels or wherever, that everybody went away and just took a 20-minute nap. Can you imagine what that would be like? And we're not so far away from that. I landed in Norway. I was teaching in Norway, and they were very proud to tell me that the whole of the Norwegian Parliament, they had yoga. Then you had teachers teaching yoga in the seat of government, and the whole Olympic team did yoga. And so there are places where this understanding is arising that actually those kind of, even the power nap culture that was quite a popular thing for a while, is helpful. Because people are like more productive, more present. You can sell it on the productivity and engagement thing, but they certainly make better decisions. Because all those people, I just like, at least just in Westminster, they're worn out and all hungover, or both. So I see that as like a really simple way to like change the kinds of decisions that can be made, is that it's insisted that before anybody votes, like, we're going to take a pause now. To do yoga nidra would be wonderful if they all chill out, but even just to stop for long enough to take a nap, just long enough to reset the nervous system so people aren't going in there in an agitated state. And even at like small levels, I see it with like team meetings and things we're trying to organize, is like, what do? We start with a nidra. And in the camp that I run, when, a lot of hard work gets done and people have important, there's a lot of labor and connection and that kind of thing. And actually what's happening is that people are in really harmonious states, even when it's pissing with rain for 10 days on this field in Somerset. What's happening is people are resting regularly. And so they behave in a completely better way. They're able to relate to each other better. So it's a little vision I've had for a long time, flash mobs of people just lying down on benches and in Trafalgar Square. Imagine that the whole world like taking a nap all at the same time. Even you didn't have to glorify it with Yoga Nidra, but so that's why we put it in 18 different languages on the site, and we're working on. I did have a vision of the practice in every single mother tongue available for free. So we are working on it. We're getting there, so that everybody can listen to the practice for free, and maybe at some point we can all do it together, live streamed Yoga Nidra.
And is that part of the reason why you chose to offer so many practices for free, and because to make it available for everyone?
Yeah, because I just think it's really important. If somebody sees there is so much available for free, they're like, oh, well, this, then at least you can pick and choose something or other, and you can find something in your own mother tongue, and you can listen to this, and it's there. Then yeah, it mattered to me to make sure there was abundance available freely, because it matters. To give it away matters. Yeah.
It would just be so powerful if that 9 to 5 culture that we have, which is not 9 to 5 anyway, it's like 8:30 to 7:45, whatever, to have that sense of, okay, like we all need quiet time at 4 p.m. rather than cakes and coffee. Because that feeling when you are in that kind of environment, and you just get really like, oh, I've got this other meeting, and it's like you have to go deeper into the like what's going to wake you up. And this idea still that we have, that rest or being quiet or meditating, or even if it's going out for a walk, if you're not going to smoke a cigarette, but you just want to go and actually have some fresh air, the way that these things get shamed so much still.
Yeah. I do see glimpses of how that is changing, that there are places where you don't have to like crawl under the table at the desk or hide in the toilet or pretend you're going to go and do something else because it's shameful to stop. It is changing, but because little by little people realize how much better they feel when they honor. You're just honoring the rhythms of life. And that 3:30, 4 o'clock thing in the afternoon is calling. People's systems are screaming for them just pause. The evidence is that you go back and people are like way more productive and able to connect with each other and relate properly and have a better meeting. And they're all like actually wiped out. And it does make a difference. Huge difference. I see people, they cross over from one little world to the other. So I get, little corporate refugees or people who are in their business who's coming in and doing trainings or doing like some of the people who are here with us this weekend, coming in from that kind of culture where you must never stop, realizing how good they feel and then taking that back with them, sharing that it is a really positive thing. And that you don't need to feel ashamed about it because it's really inhuman just to imagine that people can like run that same level of productive awareness all day.
And at all times of the year and at all times of their menstrual cycles.
Yeah.
At all times of the moon cycles, that a day is the same thing.
I know. And what I see is that all of those cycles that you've just mentioned, like looking at seasonal change and looking at times of the day and looking at menstrual cycles and life stage shifts, all of those, when we start to honor them, we realize that actually in honoring and respecting those cycles and taking adequate and appropriate rest, we become much more fully able to be fully present and human because we're not fighting ourselves. It's like so much energy goes into fighting to stay awake or fighting to be present in ways that aren't simply not appropriate. Say during the bleed phase of a menstrual cycle, it doesn't make any sense to just behave as if those things aren't happening. It's almost like the way we concrete over grass and it starts to grow up through the grass. It's like we've tried to do that with natural human rhythms. be those menstrual cycles or patterns of sleep and wakefulness during the day, or seasonal shifts of energy when we enter, and I see in the lands, in the Celtic lands, we're living in England and Ireland, and it's really dark, cold and wet. And the part of the yoga schools I were part of were like, oh no, you have to get up at this time every morning. And they were just as bad as the corporate machine, really. They were like punitive and shaming if you weren't able to do that and to be fully present and, work your socks off all the time. But it's like actually in that kind of concreting over now, again, to see the little shoots coming up. It's just not sustainable. People talk a lot about sustainable energy, and I have friends who work in that field, trying to, really minimize, carbon footprints and changing energy use in buildings. And I'm like, well, what about having respect for human energy systems and the energy of life herself, and actually working out sustainable ways to manage our resources? And I saw that as a breastfeeding counselor for a while as well, the breast milk was a natural resource, and that human energy and vitality is a precious natural resource. So we need to be respectful about that. Yeah. So it's all part of the same respect for life. You know what I mean? To have respect for these natural resources, and our energy is part of that, our vital forces. And they don't flow in straight lines from 9 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock at night. They just don't. And I'm hoping at some point there will be a wonderful future where people look back and go, you know what they used to believe or what they used to try and do? Isn't that absurd? Do you know what I mean? Isn't that an absurd thing? Do you know they didn't realize that rest was sacred? People just laugh about it. That's what I'm hoping. They'll just laugh about it.
Because it's not just 9 to 5. It's like from whenever you get up until you go to bed. And there's kids, there's having a family, there's relationships, there's friendships, there's going to cultural events, whatever it is that you fill your day with, that you would just have full energy from when that alarm goes off until bedtime. It is kind of crazy when it's totally crazy when we think about it.
It's insanity. It's always extraordinary to me that we can actually behave when it's basically just a lie. It's just simply not true. People don't function in that way. And it's quite extraordinary. We've created an entire work and social structures that seem to behave as if that's the case when it clearly isn't the case. So, maybe part of this, a future awakening is just to look back at that and go, oh, well, how on earth did anyone actually ever believe that nonsense? And it's almost like you have to kind of unplug from some of the relentless demands of those cycles to actually get a chance to see it. And I noticed it when we made choices to homeschool some of our children. We pulled out of that incredible pressure in the mornings in households that have children to get them to school, that kind of and then you got to get to work and the kids have got to get to school, and you wake up and you go straight from fast asleep through the alarm into high beta modes of massive anxiety, and you stay there all day because the day starts with you're late, eat breakfast, get your uniform on, blah, 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 stick on this, get on the bus, and then the whole day is like that. And there's and I've spoken to other families who've made choices around homeschooling, and you just unplug from that, and then you can hear all the other kids running down the street and panic and you see it, especially in a big city, dragging the kids to school. The kids are asleep, they've forgotten there's cornflakes on their shirts, and it's all really incredibly stressful until you get it down like a military operation, which is what it needs to be like. You get your lunch ready, and that whole thing, And that's just I'm just not going to do that. And what does that actually feel like? It feels really good. It just feels like people can actually take their time to emerge at the place that, and maybe every so often you do have to pull one and get up because there's something important happening, or there's some beautiful sunrise that you need to see, or something, we need capacity to do that. But every single day, all year long, with little 4 and 5 year olds and 17-year-olds who haven't probably woken up anyway, all of that. once you actually put, it's almost like you get a look at the whole thing from the outside. And I was like, well, look, that is an insane expectation. But and that, like, everybody's agreeing to do it until they stop.
And then it's like you can't go back.
Then you can't go back in the same way. Because I felt like thinking about for the future to have humans who actually know what it feels like not to be stressed is really incredibly crucial. Because if all you've ever felt is that like really anxious sense of always being late and always having to be there on time and always and the morning is like that, then it's actually quite hard to know how to do anything other than that. If that's the water you've always swum in, you can't think of anything beyond that. Whereas if you've actually had the opportunity to feel what it's like, I remember even talking to my daughter about it when he'd been homeschooled and then had to practice for herself to get up and to do that and learn to do it, trained herself the way you said you trained her to do it. But like she knows what, but she also knows when she's tired, she's going, no, I won't go today. I'm not going to go today, you know. And for people, especially, I think, you know, young women get the opportunity to tune into cycles in that way. And if you've never been able to like really feel your sleep cycle, and then all of a sudden you start getting a menstrual cycle, you haven't got a model for understanding, oh, I'm feeling tired this morning, I need to rest, or oh, that's because I'm coming into my moon at this time. And it's like we can model these things for the future so that we can know that there is a way for humans to behave differently because they've actually felt. It's like you drop into the ground of your own rhythm. And then that you look at the other stuff with astonishment because it's clearly not really very helpful.
What else do you feel is like part of sacred activism or living a radical life that will take us towards a beautiful future?
Oh, there's so many aspects of what I see as sacred activism. What I see in the work that I'm doing is that it's all around respect for rhythmic cycles. So I see one of the key things is understanding that the rhythmic cycles in terms of the menstrual cycle and menopausal experiences in women's life cycles, which we've almost managed to kind of eradicate, medicalize, pathologize, demonize, and shame to the degree no one will speak about them. But if we actually honor those, to me, I see a move towards real empowerment, and a proper reconnection is to celebrate and honor those cycles and phases of life so that there isn't any shame attached to them. What I see I do a lot of work around like menstrual health, and I'm trying to work on like, in a small way, supporting menstrual policies in schools and endeavoring to eradicate menstrual shame, because to me, that's at the root of a lot of shame around our bodies that relates to shame around sexuality, shame around aging, shame around like issues around menopause, and just the menstrual shame is at the heart of it. And I began to see that there was a connection, and other people have seen this too really clearly, that the shame we have around menstrual blood, for example, and the way that we treat that to wrap it up in little plastic envelopes and pretend like it's not there and turning the blood of life into a toxic biohazard.
Those horrible like Sani bins that you get.
Yeah. And then that to me is an absolute model and reflection. It's a mirror of what we do to the earth. So if we've got so much shame and disgust, I see that, you know, people are revolted by the idea of like seeing the blood, experiencing flow, letting that blood nourish the earth, all of these things that feel like we are considered to be deeply repulsive is a very profound disconnection. What I see, and I see this as like, it is happening. I see that the women and girls who are fully empowered, either through like growing up in a family where these things are welcomed and spoken about in an honoring way, that this is the blood of life and this is a really powerful force in a woman's life and understanding the cycles and all of that, or they get it in their family, or else they come to it later. I see women in their 30s and 40s showing up for, you know, women's work, women's woman yoga therapy and all the things that I do. And they're like connecting with their menstrual cycles and with actually just with the blood itself or with the flow, and realizing that this is a powerful reconnective force. It like to connect to the earth and to be in awareness of that changes how they treat themselves, how we treat the earth. And so it becomes impossible to practice violence or exploitation towards the earth and all living things on the earth if you treat your own body with respect. Do you see what I mean? Like, so if you can eradicate the shame that leads us to hate and harm our bodies, even to the degree of trying to kind of like pretend like women aren't menstruating and carrying on as if that's not happening and all that sort of, if we can get to the root of that, there's such huge freedom there, but there's also a complete sense that we inhabit these bodies as if they were worlds of their own. So I see that the future I see is this world where actually when we understand that the rhythms of these lives are sacred and powerful, then of course, why would you want to pollute, exploit, or ravage the earth? It just wouldn't occur to you because you really feel that you're one and the same, you're part of it. And I do see that happening with women's massive shifts. And even if they've come through all of that dogma and overlay and shaming around menstruality, that when you relieve that, there's such a huge energy liberated that they're like, oh my goodness, I really feel this now, and I really understand that we're part of this earth. To harm one woman or to shame one girl about her menstrual flow is a kind of pollution. Do you know what I mean? It's that the body is polluted by shame, and then the earth, it's the same thing. So it's like one human at a time, relieving that shame and letting people connect with their naturally arising ebbs and flows, and that goes with, and you start looking at every aspect of life. In yoga, we've got this thing about the 5 bodies. You know, there's the physical way of dealing with this, but there's also ways of connecting with our energetic flow, and welcoming emotions is another part of it, rather than shutting all that down. It's like, and then you see, well, how are we treating the flows of the water on the earth? It's the same thing. We feel like we can control these things rather than respecting the flow. And it starts to all seem that the little ecosystems of each individual, and I mostly work with women and girls, but each individual human's little ecosystem, if we can free those ecosystems from pollution and shame, then those humans will be reconnected in their understanding of being part of the whole web of life. Which it can sound all a bit vague, you know, but it's actually a reality at the daily level. You know, a practical level, to do with what you do with your menstrual blood. What kind of choices do you make about that? How are you going to deal with, moments of tiredness and exhaustion? Are you going to have another cup of coffee, or are you going to say, actually, no, we need to stop now, we need to pause? And those kinds of things are small, but like quite deep, you know.
But also it's such a huge collaborative process with men and boys too. For them to understand that their mothers, their wives, their girlfriends, their sisters, their friends are going through these different cycles, and not to shame them, but to actually really understand like what they need, what they're just the most kind of naturally inclined to be like at a certain time, and what's like no-go at that time, but not in this like way where it's often seen as a degrading thing, but actually that it honors what the role is of that turning in, and how that benefits everyone. And I just see a future where if women and mothers are talking to their daughters and their sons about their menstruation and their cycles, then all of those boys grow up to be men that understand all of that. And then we have a whole shift.
A complete shift. And it's like, it's an educative process. It's also a sharing process. And there's a degree to which discretion and privacy is still part of the menstrual process. I see that with younger girls. They're like, well, actually, I don't really want to talk about this with dad right now. But like, to know that their fathers and their brothers realize where they are, that takes some sharing. And I think older women have a role in that, because it's actually leading an educative and open space of conversation about that, and respecting the girl's privacy, and also doing really simple things like educating boys and men to realize it's in everybody's best interest. It's not just about, oh, we need to respect these women's times, but this is like, well, like, I know women who keep their dates, their own menstrual dates on the family calendar, and the boys know, they know, well, you don't ask mum for that now. It's like we do a seasonal awareness. So the menstrual bleed is the wintertime now. Or don't ask her stuff in the wintertime, don't ask her next week. And if the women start to actually say, well, actually, now's not a good time to ask me this, ask me again next week. I need this time. And it's like, oh, you get a better answer, or this is a better time for it. So it's like, actually, you're kind of optimizing. I don't want to make it seem too corporate, but like it helps family harmony for everybody to know. Whereas if the mother, who's kind of at the heart of that family, is like holding down this hard line, like, don't let anybody know, well, everybody suffers at that point, suffers from something that's so hidden that it's gone bad. Whereas if it's in conversation and awareness, and I found that a lot of men are really excited to know about this. How does this affect your sexual relatingness with your partners? It makes a big difference. There's a huge ebb and flow in libido and willingness to kind of connect in an intimate way through the menstrual cycle. It's in everybody's best interest to honor that. If you're engaging in intimate relatings with people, you need to be really clear about that. Whereas what's happened is that, if you're on the pill the whole time, that's trying to eradicating all these ebbs and flows. And so people forget that when you get into the reality of naturally arising menstrual cycles, which in some ways it's a radical act to have a cycle that's not controlled by some process of synthetic hormones, patches and implants, and that's a radical act. Who would believe that, to be in that place? And it is, I do see that happening, because it's like, and everybody's involved, and then it's not like a weird, hidden, scary thing where but even now, some girls have no clue about what's about to happen to them. I know this because my daughter's coming back, and her and her friends are all clued up because, they got the kind of mums who talk about this stuff. They say, oh, poor so-and-so, her mama never talked to her about this. We've told her all the things she needs to know. So between them, the girls who are getting the benefit of this education are sharing it with their sisters because they're friends. They can say that, well, you need to know this, And then I think that information goes out. So I see with my sons who are like, now between the ages of about 18 and 21, I'm like, how is it with your girlfriends? And they go, oh God, well, they all talk about menstruation. Like, we're cool with that. They all know, they know your work. They know the work of all the other women who have been doing this for a long time. So I felt that it was a real shift in consciousness for this younger generation between, my children's ages. Like, boys are 18 and 21, and they're like, oh yeah, our girlfriends talk about that stuff all the time. It's like amazing. I was like, really? They're like, oh yeah. But whether or not it's like those girls know that these boys they're talking with are cool with it because they've grown up with understanding that that's part of it. But it does seem it is evidently possible. That's what I see. Like, why would that not be possible? And so certain kind of concepts that you think you have to explain and that are touchy subjects are just like not issues. So it's clearly possible. It's a beautiful thing. It's just not an issue for them.
It's interesting thinking about the different kind of generational cycles that we've been on. Because I'd forgot about the pill because I hadn't thought about it for so long. When you mentioned it, I remembered that when me and my friends were at high school, as soon as our menstrual cycle started, we went and got the pill because it was almost like this kind of cool womanly thing to do. But it was like that. There wasn't an awareness of the deeper aspect of what was happening. And most of us, started to take the pill like pretty much as soon as we got our cycles. And I wonder, well, what did that do to our systems? And then we discovered, you can run them together for like 2 or 3 months at a time, so you don't have to have a period. And there was this whole thing. And I remember one of my friends, like, her boobs grew really big. And then she was like, I think like 10 years later, she was like, I'm scared to come off this pill because they might just disappear again. And so actually going through that process of being a teenager and turning into a woman, already jacked up on all these hormones, and kind of unnecessarily as well, because it's not like we were at it every night with our partners. We were like at school. And so, yeah, I think it was when I was at university that I was like, hang on, why am I taking this? And I got out quite early, but a lot of my friends then continued, and some of them are still on it today. And then you think, okay, wow, that's like 20 years.
Yeah. And that culture that somehow taking the pill would be a good thing because it would like regulate your cycles, and then you'd have sexual freedom. All these things, they're actually delusions, because that isn't what the pill does at all. All the pill does is like con your body into believing it's pregnant, hence the nice big boobs. It's like that's what's going on. So there's a particular process that happens, like when any cycle is getting established in those early years, in the teen years, it's quite natural for those cycles to be a bit erratic, and they're getting into their rhythm. And what's happening during that process is that is an opportunity for the girls to learn their cycles and to learn a lot. That like the body's giving extraordinary signals about fertility. So when you're saying it wasn't even necessary for contraceptive purposes, well, no, because if a woman starts to learn all the signs of her body, like, there's this cervical mucus, and there's a change in my breast tenderness, or I can feel the movement of my cervix, or all these different signs of natural fertility, it becomes incredibly clear on the few days in the cycle when the woman is fertile. Like there's knowledge there, and that knowledge is eradicated. It's almost, we've been speaking also about like the process of decolonizing the mind from like political colonization processes that eradicate power and bring control from above. And like that's kind of what's happening with some of the practices of eradicating menstrual cycles. So in the same way that if you're under colonization, a lot of like indigenous wisdom either gets eradicated or criminalized. Yeah, so you can't speak your language or have your wisdoms or whatever it is, because you're going to die if people find you. That happened in Ireland. Like if you had those old laws, you would be killed if you were connected with any of that. Or it's the same thing. It's like somehow actually connecting with the wisdom of the menstrual cycle has not been a possibility. It's been eradicated because during those years when you would be learning about that, I don't know, from the ages of 13 to 23 or something, if you're already on the pill, then there is no way to connect with your deep inner knowing, because basically it's been eradicated. All the ebbs and flows that are the signs of the cycle are taken out. I mean, not to speak about all the health issues to do with like not establishing good bone mass and all. Anyway, there's a whole set of allied health issues that don't emerge till later. And then what I worked with a lot over the years was fertility issues that were pretty much directly resulting in results of having been on the pill for a really long time and expecting everything was going to be fine when you come off it, and going, well, where's the baby now? Well, it's going to take a while to even learn how to reconnect with these cycles and let them have their own flow. And there's a massive paradox in this, because there's a cyclical process of like sexual potency and arousal and desire and libido that's present in a natural menstrual cycle, but is totally absent in if you're on a pill, because it just takes out all the highs and the lows. And there's quite a number of interesting studies about that kind of stuff. But to me, when we're thinking about a future of like freedom and reconnection, there's a process that's in mass taken of synthetic hormones for contraceptive purposes, largely unnecessarily. There are many other ways to manage conception, mostly to do with understanding how the body works. And then if you have a whole generation of folk who've been disconnected from that, then the reconnection process can be quite painful and a bit frightening, because it's this whole other world that was never given time to. It's like not even knowing the language of it. Do you know what I mean? That's why there are parallels with the whole colonization process. It's like, well, actually, this body has been colonized by these hormones that aren't actually, they're not endogenous. They're not in the body. The indigenous wisdom of the body is inaccessible or banished.
It did feel like that, because it's like the opposite would have been becoming a teenager, having some kind of rites of passage and understanding the potency of becoming a woman. And the conditioning in my school in Derby, in the Midlands in the UK, was get on the pill, because that's like the status symbol of becoming a teenager. Yeah, the complete opposite. And I had like a rough ride as a teenager. And I know part of it was that I was cut off from my creativity for various reasons. And I wonder now, just like, I've never thought about this before, but as we're talking now, I wonder how much that also would have affected me understanding how to channel all that power that starts to like arise when you become a teenage woman, a teenage girl, and everything, you know, there's so much going on, and then adding all those chemicals into the mix.
It really, like, when it's almost like you're looking back at that experience, it's like trying to reframe and understand what was happening from a different perspective. Because at the time when we make these choices, we're right in the culture that's like, oh, that's a perfectly normal thing to do. But like, you're now looking at it from outside of that going, well, now I understand all the wisdom of these cycles, and I see there's these powerful meditative moments, and there's these deeply creative moments, and there's these highly aroused moments in the cycle, and they have rhythm and they have pattern, and each one is got its own value and beauty, and you start to do deep self-study and understanding, and it's a source of great wisdom. And they're like, well, look at all this wisdom. And then when you look back at those younger selves trying to make sense out of things, and it's as if a whole aspect of that wisdom was just not accessible, because the moment that you start eradicating that cycle, and the language that's used around putting young women on the pill is often quite fearful. It's around a massive fear of sexuality, fear of fertility, fear that terrible things are going to happen to these girls. And also, well, quite, a thing about making girls and women, sexually available at all points,
Yeah,
it's not
in my
really
school, it was
freedom.
Definitely about not being prudish, kind of, so it was kind of like a status symbol in that way, which is insane.
It is, because it gives you the sense that the pill is a sign of your sexual freedom as a young woman. But actually what it is a very effective means to disconnect you from your true power.
This part of the conversation really gives me hope about what we're talking about, rest. Because it's like, with that example, I can look back 20 years and go, whoa, that was insane. And that was so culturally normal.
Yeah.
Perhaps some say that consciousness is, speeding up, and we're getting more awake or faster at catching some of these things. So maybe in just a year, we can look back and go, oh, alarm clocks, like crazy, not having sleep, like the anxiety of not having sleep, all of these things, and be like, whoa, what were we doing to ourselves?
I think that there is, a sense of the awakening process speeding up a little bit. That actually, and also sadly, that the levels of suffering that are caused by trying to live as if these cycles don't really exist is becoming more and more evident in, like, I see it in terms of massive numbers of people with severe insomnia, severe menstrual pains, really serious fertility issues, and all of this stuff is all growing faster and faster, and the level of suffering that it's causing is leading people to look for other ways of understanding things, and that wakes people up. Humans are quite like that sometimes. Like sometimes we need to experience suffering and then we wake up and go, oh, there is another way to relieve this suffering, and humans will do anything to relieve suffering. So there's a hope that people look for other ways to be with their natural cycles, whether that's menstrual cycles or sleep cycles, and reconnect and respect them a little better.
Hello, this is Amisha. We are just taking a little break from the conversation here. On behalf of myself and the team, I want to say thank you for being part of creating a beautiful future. We make this for you so that we will all have the vision, wisdom, and activism we need at this time to weave a new narrative. Can you help us with this? You can do that by making a monthly donation to the podcast to cover our costs. Just the equivalent of a fair trade banana you might eat or a chai latte you might drink whilst you listen to this will make a huge difference to us. Head to www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community to become a monthly patron. And the other thing is to tell your friends about this podcast so they can tune in too. Send them a message or post on social media and let them know what you love about it. And whilst you're at it, leave us a review. And now, back to the conversation. Thank you for your loving beauty. I want to ask you about something, this term that I've heard you use of post-lineage yoga.
Oh, okay.
And what that means.
All right. I love this term, and I like to give credit where it's due, because the term post-lineage yoga, meaning the kind of yoga that's practiced not anti-lineage. When we talk about lineage, we mean about schools of yoga, but it's not anti-lineage. It's not no lineage. It's in a space beyond that lineage. And the term has been coined by Dr. Theodora Wildcroft. And Theo,
excellent name.
Yes, it's a very fine name. Dr. Theodora Wildcroft, who's recently completed a PhD in a thesis that was exploring power dynamics and authority patterns in teaching in yoga. And she studied a number of different practitioners and community gatherings of yoga in the UK, began to ask questions in the face of what is fundamentally a big authority crisis in yoga. The Me Too campaign kind of began to find echoes into the threads of the yoga web, and Me Too in yoga, and abusive behaviors of teachers and various kinds of punitive and patriarchal power structures are being questioned. And it's a very helpful term. And for me, I was delighted that she came up with this term. She's a colleague that works with us in the Yoga Nidra network. We were part of her study group. She came and studied our camp that we run and the kind of yoga that I'm sharing, and how that teaching plans out often in very different structures that aren't replicating the kind of old school hierarchies of the sage up on the stage and everybody doing what they say according to the deep kind of belief that person is the one with the sole access to truth, and everybody has to do what they're told, and very authoritarian models. And so I see in post-lineage yoga, and I think the term is possibly useful in many other fields too. And it kind of goes, I think it's hand in hand with decolonization, because what's happening in the post-lineage yoga world, and I call myself PPL, proudly post-lineage, is often people who have been through traditional lineages and schools of learning and teaching yoga, and who have been part of those structures and who have learnt the teachings which are immensely valuable. And my experience with Yoga Nidra was a post-lineage experience. I immensely valued what I'd learned within this school, but the way that the power was held, and it was really, in lots of ways, very abusive and authoritarian. And that was apparently to protect the teachings. And I was like, no, these teachings are too precious to be held within these very oppressive structures. And they're harmful. Intersecting networks of oppression around privilege and authority and all sorts of things, and exclusion and fear you must do it this way because Guruji says if you don't do it this way, it will be wrong. And all of this. And if you're free of that fear and those oppressive kinds of exclusive hierarchies and cultish kind of networks, and you get out of that, you can still carry those teachings with you and pass them on in different ways that empower people and say, you can take this teaching and let's find a way for it to work for you. And it means it's accessible and it's inclusive and it's diverse and it's appropriate and applicable and therapeutic. And like everybody can get what aspects of those teachings is going to be helpful for them. And they don't all have to sign up to the guru thing. It's like, because those teachings are it's like techniques of liberation that have been like locking people in cages for years. Because if you want to get those techniques, you've got to come into the cage with us and we'll lock you in here and that kind of thing. And so I give great thanks and praise to Theo Wildcroft for her work and for naming something, describing something that she already saw. And it's really helpful. I think that's where academic work is very valuable. The researchers she could see what was happening and she gave it a name. And I'm like, that's a name I'm happy to have. Isn't that helpful? We can liberate these teachings that are so valuable and get them out into the world.
And they've done with respect as well.
Yeah.
And then it opens up space for the deep listening so that a teacher is free to listen to and observe what is in that room and be able to serve that space. Absolutely. Rather than read the script or do it in the rigid way that is what you're supposed to do.
Yes. So specifically in terms of Yoga Nidra, what post-lineage Yoga Nidra looks like for me is really responsive. Like we co-created a Nidra today. Everybody was like, I'd like to hear this and I want to hear this and this is the words I want to hear and this is how I'd like to feel. And so we put all those words together and using the precious structure that we'd learned from all the existing traditions and schools, we did something that was uniquely specific to the moment, responsive to the people that were there.
And it was so beautiful, so powerful.
Very powerful because everybody's voices were heard. And in yoga teaching, what happens is like, all around the margins and the people who are like not ever going to get up on that stage with the big boss, because everybody's voices can be heard and we can actually make sure that we've got practices that are meaningful and healing when people really need them. We don't want to block access to that stuff because we all need those things,
But also when I go into a space with a teacher, what I want, like what speaks to me is when clearly they have deep reverence and respect and clearly they have studied and they have learn, and you can feel that they've gone on their own processes and they've been in some dark corners and they've found, their own way through. But it's like you feel them, you feel their essence, you feel like they are fully present there and you're in a reciprocal relationship with them. And that involves the teacher being free to be all of that rather than trying to please somebody else in an oppressive system of authority or feeling like they have to do it this way that doesn't feel right in their body. Because you can feel that awkwardness in someone when they're doing something that isn't aligned with who they are.
Yeah. And
then it always feels a bit like, oh, but I don't want to lift my arm in the air like that now.
It's like an imposition. I mean, in some kinds of yoga, that's an imposition of shapes and forms in the body. And in Yoga Nidra, what it is an imposition of a script that maybe somebody wrote maybe, 20 years ago in another place. And they've never seen the people who are showing up in front of you in your city or in your town. And you're a facilitator of that practice. You need to pay attention to the people who are there and learn from the people. There's this, I found, a really reciprocal conversations going on between the students and the teachers, and listening and learning from each other is not feasible if you're trying to replicate a script that you've been given and told that you've got to read that out. Because A, you can't see the people in front of you because you're busy reading it. And B, how relevant is that? There may be parts of it that are relevant, but you're not going to know that unless your primary I sense as a facilitator of this practice, my primary responsibility is to the well-being and the safety of the people in the room with me, not to whoever trademarked the practice.
But also the ability to speak to the time and the moment that we're in.
Yeah.
I find like when I went to spend some time in Osho's ashram, I had to go and just see what it was like. And they still play videos of Osho every day, rather than whoever are the teachers of now that are in their bodies alive that could come and talk to us. I was with some friends and we created a few little things just to help us, like to laugh when we needed to in those spaces, because it could, otherwise it would get the anger would boil some of the oppressive, strange systems. But I remember we were watching one video and Osho was talking about AIDS, because that was a big thing in that moment when he made that video. And then we were talking after dinner, like, well, I wonder what Osho, or what the people in this lineage, or the people that spent like 20, 30, 40 years with Osho, what they think about climate breakdown or 5G or the refugee situation in the world, or how are you able to integrate those practices with the times that we live in if we're not able to pull in the wisdom of the moment as well as the sacredness of the teachings?
Yeah, and that's a question that's just, it really requires for us to see like what happens in those structures when the teacher or the guru is dead. There's a kind of ossification and it shuts everything down. So instead of seeing our responsibility is like, we are on this planet now, these are the pressing concerns for us at this moment. How might we find value and wisdom in the teachings we have to address this issue for these people here? And we're not going to find that if the only thing that's played on the video is the words of the teacher. It's like, actually, how are they living in the actions of the people who've embodied those teachings? What does that have to show us about how valuable this is? What are they actually able to do?
And I want to know, like, what wisdom and poetry and insights the person that is alive and is in that space has to say. I don't want to watch a video, or I don't want to have a reading from the past. I mean, sometimes that's nice to include those things. And I believe very much in the respect of traditions and respect of texts and things like this. Yeah. But it's like, I feel like as facilitators, it's our job to bring it all to life and bring it into the present. And like you said, bring it into reciprocal relationship.
Yeah. Bring it into a living web, a network of how, what I see is that the idea of single lines of transmission was probably a really effective strategy at one point. But we actually haven't really got time for that now. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it was a method for passing and protecting those teachings on at other times. And what I see now is I'm constantly coming as if on a web into interconnection and meeting and weaving with quite a lot of other like ideas and practices, and that there's an extraordinary confluence. And to me, part of that is like things flowing together to meet in new ways, so that, it might be something that hasn't happened before. So, you're working with Yoga Nidra, but we're also like bringing poetry into that, and that might be just a creative, different forms of creative expression or different ways of sharing these things. But I also see that in the process of recognizing this whole post-lineage decolonized moment, that the work I'm doing is trying to go down underneath where all those oppressive systems came on top, and get into the substratum, into what's beneath some of these powerful spiritual practices. So I found like a confluence of reconnection at a kind of indigenous wisdom level where a lot of things join up. So it looks like, we've been running this stuff with like the Indo-Celtic melding and like looking at practices that seem similar across like dream practices in different traditions. But fundamentally what I see is this isn't like a pastiche or some kind of multicultural kind of patchwork thing going on. What it is that when we get down deep enough, and we need to dig really deep underneath those overlays, we feel a deep connection. That some of the respectful ways, I just ran this course in Chicago where I saw this happening, a respect for ancient ways we talk about, say, for postnatal care, that are present in some of the teachings that were there from a Mexican doula and a healer. And she was speaking about stuff that was like, well, this is really similar to what was happening in Ayurveda. And then someone was like, oh, no, actually, this is what we do in Chinese medicine. And when we're looking at like, how do we form a therapeutic response from the wisdoms of what's there that really is healing, we often get in underneath and we find that there has been a confluence, like a thread that's actually all earth wisdom. That's what I saw. All those systems that honored, in this particular instance, it was postnatal care for the woman who's just given birth. They were all saying very similar things. And this, it's not just like the overlay of, oh, it's all just, foreign and we can just like take a bit of this and a bit of that and have some kind of like postmodern hodgepodge of any kind of spiritual tradition. It wasn't that. It was like getting underneath all those overlays led to this deep feminine awakening. All the women in the room went, well, this is actually teaching the same life-affirming, earth-based wisdoms that are all about cycles and wisdom and nourishing and respect for life and for these powers. And it was underneath. It was so beautiful. And I wrote about that in Yoni Shakti. When you dig down in underneath, it's this living traditions that are still, alive. And yeah, despite all the things, you overlay it, they've been stolen from and all that. And we're coming into a place of reconnection with that. So it's like a homecoming. And I feel that's very affirming. Like actually it's in us. Like when people start to rest, they go, yeah, I know this feels good. This isn't an overlay. This isn't a new thing. This is like, yes, this genuinely in an ancient wisdom of the body kind of way feels good. The way that we treat this body at this time when it's postnatal, when it's premenstrual or exhausted or aging or whatever, having respect for these cycles and making use of what we have to really, nourish life.
And just on the simpler level, the de-stressing. And the emotional processing that these practices give time for. I mean, I've just this one weekend and I'm like, oh, great, I got to process that, and then this moved through, and this pain like appeared on the first night, a physical pain, and then it was there the second morning, and now it's gone. And I can feel all of these little movements that have happened in just a couple of days.
And that's precious to hear. It's precious to hear because it's like all that you needed was to be given permission to take time to pause and reflect, and then let the ancient wisdom of the body, which is a self-healing organism, sort stuff out. And yeah, it's good to have structures that hold that space. And you came into a retreat space that allowed for that to happen. But those things are very precious to get the time to do that. But if we have that like at a daily level, and you see what a difference that makes to the whole field. If even one person in a family or a company or a business or a school is doing that process, that affects everybody around that person. And then people are like, oh, what are you doing? That's what I'm doing. Oh, that sounds like a good idea. And it starts to spread just because it clearly feels good to be around people who've dealt with that stuff or who have got space to rest. I had a really wonderful teacher in Stroud who was often, she would be given compliments. People would say, it was very restful. to be with you. So restful to be with you. She would just turn to them and say, yes, that's because I rest. So people could feel the restful nature of her being, not because she was teaching about restfulness, but because she was actually resting. It's kind of contagious, which is a great kind of contagion to have, isn't it? The contagion of, oh, I feel it's restful to be with you. What are you doing? Well, actually, I'm resting. What's your practice? Oh, this is how we do it.
And I feel like one of the words that you used a lot this weekend was the word welcome, and how powerful that is, of welcoming ourselves and welcoming each other and welcoming those natural healing processes of our body that our body wants to do, of welcoming the goddess of Nidra, of welcoming sleep, of welcoming rest.
Yeah, that capacity even to welcome in, I said all that arises is often part of the practice, because in order to settle, we need to be able to welcome in noise and disturbance outside, and to settle in that space, whatever is happening. And that's a really hugely important skill. So cultivating the capacity to welcome in all that arises when we're in a kind of lovely situation, like you've been here in this beautiful retreat center with delicious food and plenty of time to rest and all of those wonderful privileges that come when we get in those places. But if you can cultivate it in that place, then you can cultivate it in grief and under pressure and in difficult, noisy, painful situations where people are suffering and where we're engaging with challenge and obstruction and difficulty. And you can still allow there to be a welcoming in for whatever arises. And it basically is a life skill, a really powerful life skill, to see the paradoxes unfolding. And that to me has been one of the real precious gifts of Nidra, like existing at a time where there's deep grief. I feel a deep grief and pain about what I see arising. And at the same time, joyful astonishment in the beauty of every day and all the things that are happening and the wonderful things that people do. And holding those two things together at the same time is a skill we need to cultivate, because they're not going to go away. It's like, actually, that's the nature of life, is to inhabit that. And Yoga Nidra is like, if we rest in the place of welcoming those things in, that becomes a reality we can live. Yeah.
Thank you. I was just feeling like I wish that you had the Shruti box out and you could play us out with a song or a poem. But actually, what might be really nice is if we include a Yoga Nidra recording at the end of this, so that
what a nice
idea. all of you wonderful people listening, that you can actually experience what we're talking about right now and not unless you're driving or something.
Yeah.
But if not, then you can enjoy this Nidra that we will lovingly choose.
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Yeah, definitely don't do it if you're driving. But if you're listening and you're able to go and just lie down in a spot or even sit up and have a listen, you can get a feel for the practice we've been describing. Perfect. We'll definitely do that. There'll be a link with a practice attached to it or something to download so you can hear it.
There's so much more that you and I could talk about. We've just scratched the surface. But given that it is late here and that we are going to model good rest.
Good rest. We're modeling excellence in resting practices.
That this is a perfect time to close this part of the conversation and invite in the practice, and to share the best websites and everything where people can find out more.
Yeah. So the Yoga Nidra Network, that's a .org, and the Yoga Nidra Network is the place where I was saying we had free downloadable Yoga Nidras in 18 different languages, maybe more by the time you get there. We're working on more. And that's a good resource. And then the yonishakti.co website also has more Yoga Nidras specifically relating to women's health issues and and initiatory stages in our lives. So they're two useful sites to visit, to access practices and to find out a little bit more about further resources.
And then, of course, you have many workshops and retreats and the Santosha camp. And
the Santosha
ways.
Yoga camp is there. That has its own site. And that's a beautiful place where we practice Yoga Nidra 5 times a day and have lots of wonderful teachers. That's a sort of home of post-lineage yoga teachings going on there. That's lovely. This is good, yeah. It's been really nice to be able to share all these things with everybody listening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I don't know if you can all hear, but there is snoring happening in the background.
There is. There's a deeply restful being having a good sleep, if you can hear the snoring. And that's what we'll be doing shortly.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?
So, welcome home to yourself. Welcome home to yourself, and welcome to this morning's practice of Yoga Nidra. This morning is an experience of total Yoga Nidra, drawing upon many different traditions and allowing for everyone to feel that they can settle in and be welcome. So that is the main intention of the practice, is just so that you can be welcome here, welcome home to yourself. And in this welcome, let there be simply a sense of arriving. You have arrived, and now there isn't anywhere else that you need to be going, and there isn't anything else that you need to be doing. And just to be here is more than enough. And to feel that this body can be held safely. I keep my eyes open. So that you can, if you wish, rest your eyes and know that in this circle of belonging, you are welcome and safe and sound here. So if the body feels very comfortably settled into delicious stillness, then by all means let the body be still. And if perhaps during the process of this practice the need to move is arising, you may feel a need to wriggle or stretch to make yourself a little bit more comfortable, to sneeze or cough or any of these things which human bodies will do, then all of these things are welcome. There's no need to feel that you don't have the permission to move. You have expressed permission to do whatever you would like in order to be comfortable. And in fact, right now, if there is something you could do that would make you even 0.05% more comfortable than you already are, please do go ahead and do that now. And at any point in the practice that you need to, feel free to allow yourself to adjust and be more comfortable And also to rest absolutely still in this delicious stillness, if that is what feels like it is perfect. All of this is good because you know what? This is your practice. So it's your practice. It belongs to you. It never did exist before in just this way. This is a unique phenomenon arising right now. It'll never again be the same. And so knowing that it is your practice means that obviously you can't do it wrong. There isn't any way you can do it wrong because it belongs to you and because actually there is nothing to do. Nothing to do. And in that awareness of there being nothing to do, I invite you to simply drop out of doing and to drop out of thinking and to arrive gently in a welcome place of simply feeling and being. And to know that there aren't any deadlines to meet. There's nothing to be achieved. There is nothing that you need to be doing that would make you actually any more perfect than you already are right now. And just that you are here is all that matters. And that you are welcome. So we invite you to welcome all of the sounds that can be heard in this space. And to allow there to be a real welcome for everything that can be heard. And in this welcome for everything that can be heard, let there be a welcome for the space in which this body is resting. And a welcome for the space outside of this building and for all the sounds that arise outside, and to know that every sound is welcome and that the sweeter the welcome for each sound, the deeper the settling into this openness of awareness, which is Yoga Nidra. Welcome home to yourself. Let there be a welcome maybe for the spaces inside the ears where the sounds are traveling, feeling the spaces coming in. And maybe hearing the sound of the breath also. And perhaps allowing there to be a lovely welcome also for the touch of the air. Feeling maybe the air on the skin of the ears. The air coming inside the ears, like the little shells of the ears, receiving the sounds. And welcoming the touch of the air on the whole of the skin. Now welcome for this element of air. Maybe noticing, perhaps you could notice how it is that part of the body is covered, part uncovered. You might notice the different temperatures and welcome the different textures that are detectable through the skin which is uncovered and the skin which is covered. Maybe noticing also the places where the body is meeting the support beneath, maybe through the rugs and the mats and down through the floor. And noticing all the places where there's a touch, a connection between the body, bless you, and the things that are covering the body and the things which are supporting the body. Noticing all of this. Perhaps you could notice the touch on the skin, from the air. Let there be a welcome for the air, and then perhaps also maybe now feeling the air traveling in and out through the nostrils. And feeling perhaps a welcome for the air over the eyes. Perhaps noticing how the eyelids touch the upper eyelid on the lower eyelid, welcoming the touch of the air. And perhaps noticing that little space that's just there where the eyelid is touching the eyeball. You feel the gentle touch, perhaps the resting of the quiet lids on the eyes, and perhaps in that space a welcome for any light that's visible. Even if the eyes are covered, maybe welcoming whatever is visible there, whatever is visible in the space in between the eyelids and the eyes. Welcoming the element of fire by whose light we see. Letting there be a welcome for that. And for any places in the body that feel warm. Perhaps some places deep inside the body are warmer than others. Noticing the presence of the fire in the body. And welcoming, along with the fire, also the element of water. So perhaps noticing the tongue now, resting inside the mouth, letting there be a welcome for the tongue resting and for the two lips touching, and for any water inside the mouth, the moistness inside the mouth. Welcoming all the different taste sensations, letting there be a welcome for the element of water in the body, not just inside the mouth, but maybe the moistness on the eyes, and in every cell of the body, all the fluids, the movement of the blood and the lymph, and letting there be a warm welcome for the element of water in its fluidity, moving through the body, and gently letting there be also a welcome for the earth. Feel how it is to notice the places where the body is resting upon the earth, and feel the heaviness of the body. So the bones and the joints, and feel how it is that heaviness is so welcome. So welcomed by the earth, that every breath that goes out could give away that heaviness and really allow for the breath to deliver the weight of the body down into the earth. And as that happens, notice the breath may be moving in the nostrils, and notice all of the different odors, the aromas, the smells in this room. Welcoming a reconnection now with the element of earth with each breath. Letting this body made from the earth rest upon the earth. Letting this world of the body rest upon the earth's body. And settling into this welcoming for all that arises, for all of the elements, for the earth and the water present in the body, for the fire and the air, and all the spaces in which this body is resting. Know that every single part of this body is welcome. And setting the awareness free, allowing for the body to rest and receive a sweet welcome for every part, so that as the body rests, there can be a sense of the mental attention traveling around the body, gently visiting each place in turn as if the awareness was taking a little walk, a stroll around the world of the body and visiting every place with love and wonder, so that the place between the two eyebrows, like a little valley, could receive the awareness. And in that little journey, you can visit the space at the base of the throat, between the two collarbones. Every place is welcome. Every place in this body is welcome. All the way down the left arm, through the shoulder and the elbow and the wrist, down into the palm of the left hand, visiting the thumb, index finger, middle finger, ring finger, little finger. Visiting with welcome the left wrist, elbow and shoulder, and returning to the little space at the base of the throat between the two collarbones, and over down the right arm, visiting the right shoulder, elbow and wrist, into the palm of the right hand and the back of the right hand, visiting each place in turn. Right thumb, index finger, middle finger, ring finger, little finger. Visiting the right wrist, elbow and shoulder. Returning the awareness to the base of the throat. In this openness of awareness, which is Yoga Nidra, visiting the middle of the breastbone, right side of the chest, center of the chest, left side of the chest, center of the chest. Bring the awareness down into the belly, welcoming the whole of the chest and the whole of the belly. Welcoming the whole of the belly and the whole of the pelvis. Welcoming all sensations arising in perception in the whole of the belly and the pelvis and all the way down the legs. Left hip and knee and ankle and all the way down into the left foot. Big toe, second toe, third toe, fourth toe, little toe. Welcoming the left ankle, knee and hip, and traveling with the awareness over to the right hip, knee, ankle, and down into the right foot, right big toe, second toe, third toe, fourth toe and little toe. Receiving the awareness in the right ankle, knee and hip. Welcoming the belly and the pelvis, welcoming all sensations arising in the pelvis and the belly and up into the chest and the throat. Returning to the place between the two eyebrows, letting the awareness rest deep inside the head, letting the awareness rest deep inside the throat, at the level of the place between the two collarbones. Letting the awareness rest deep in the heart's core, behind the middle of the breastbone. Welcome home to yourself. Welcome home to the openness of awareness, which is Yoga Nidra. Just to be here is enough. Just to be here is enough. Welcome. So in this openness of awareness, which is Yoga Nidra, all that arises is welcome. Just noticing perhaps the body resting and allowing for the physical body perhaps to be sleeping, at least parts of the body to be sleeping. And then allowing for the mind to be alert and attentive and noticing these two things. Perhaps the body is sleeping, but the mind is awake. The mind alert and the body resting. And notice these two things at the same time. Welcome being asleep and being awake, being rested and alert at the same time. Welcoming all of this into conscious awareness and allowing for the breath to move a little bit more freely through the body so that there can be a sense of gently letting this welcome be absolutely present in every dimension, even as we move towards the end, very slowly, of the the tail end of the practice, let there be a welcome for all that arises. You truly are that openness of awareness in which everything arises and dissolves. And in that place of welcome, simply allow there to be also a welcome for any movements that the body might wish to make at this point. And maybe wriggle and stretch so that you can get more comfortable. This practice of Yoga Nidra now is coming towards a close. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.